and welcome to the latest episode of the Online Warriors podcast, continuing into the month of January and into the year of 2024. I'm Illeagle 86, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friends Techtic and Nerdbomber.
Heyo.
What's going on, guys? Heyo.
Hello.
We got some news for you today. We're getting back into science. We're remembering science. I feel like that might be the story of the week this week. We used to do, I think, a lot more tech topics than we have done in a while. We're rediscovering our academic and intellectual roots. So hopefully that's something that you're on board with. So we're going to be talking about the universe. That's my plug for that topic. We're talking about God of War, which I've talked about in my What Are You Up To's a couple times in recent history. Nerdbomber, also a very big fan of that franchise. It was in the news this week owing to something that happened at CES 2024. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to be talking about The Mandalorian, because it's been a while, but something Mandalorian happened that I imagine we might have some strong feelings about. I think I have some pretty strong feelings about it, not to, tip my hand immediately. But
there's been a real resurgence of Mandalorian in the news lately. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, we'll get into that. I have some thoughts and I have some questions, as I always do. And in fact, why don't we just dive right in and start with that topic? Because I think that might be the one where I'm going to be the most conversationally vibrant.
Ooh.
The Mandalorian and Grogu, and for those that don't know, when I say Grogu, I mean Baby Yoda. They're getting a movie. Produced by Jon Favreau, Kathleen Kennedy, Dave Filoni. The Mandalorian and Grogu will go into production in 2024. Here's the deal. Okay. Also, I think I'm contractually obligated to say this is the way, because everything I've seen that is like talking about how this movie's being made ends with them saying this is the way. So my history with The Mandalorian, I don't know if it's any different than your guys, but I watched season 1. It freaking ruled. I think that was during pandemic times, and it was like a really great pandemic level escape, I would say. I watched season 2. I would say it also ruled. Maybe slightly less than season 1, but generally speaking, it ruled. I believe my wife and I watched 1 episode or 2 episodes of season 3, and we were like, okay, this is our exit. Haven't been back since. And I think that was the correct choice based on because like, it was one of those things. Wasn't The Mandalorian season 3, vague spoiler alert, like, wasn't that the one where they were like, oh, hey, Jack Black was on this episode and like Lizzo was on this episode?
We did the same exact thing.
And it just like got kind of dumb.
This is my exit. And the reason why is because it was the fact that they were just bottle episodes. They were kind of self-contained adventures. And then as we got further and further down the road, a lot more things became intertwined, and it started to lose what gave it. It started to lose what made it so good. And so going back into the movie, this could either be good or bad, right? Because the episodes themselves
correct. 100%
are
agree.
fairly long in length. They're not like little 20-minute stints. And so
they used to be. Again, they used to be. If you think back to season 1, I believe the season 1 episodes probably averaged about a half an hour. I'm going to Google that while you're talking, because I'm curious. I want to fact check that.
But there were also 2-part adventures. And so what is a movie but two-part episodes as far as length is concerned? So I think they can do it well as long as it maintains the formula that we've grown to love, which is a self-contained adventure. Start, middle, end, done.
Well, my problem is that, and I get they sort of tried to move back away from it a little bit, but once you introduce a connection to the Jedi, I don't know how you fully get rid of that just as self-contained. Like, this is only about, Mandalorian lore. I don't want a greater connection to the Skywalkers. I don't want even a greater world connection. Like, let it just be something that's important to Mando. And then you just have Baby Yoda there along for the ride because he's cute as heck. And I don't want to have this like even side story about, oh, he's, torn between being a Jedi and being a Mandalorian. Like, no, just give us a fun little non-connected adventure, but like a buddy, I don't want to call it a comedy, but like a buddy cop show, but with Mando and Grogu, and don't connect it to anything else.
I would go so far. So first of all, I did Google around. Someone on Reddit, first of all, thank God for Reddit. Someone on Reddit really calculated the average episode length for both season 1 and season 2. I don't have season 3 in front of me, but the season 1 average episode length was 40 minutes. I will say chapter 2, The Child, was 32 minutes long. It appears that was the lowest episode length in seasons 1 and 2. Season 2 episode length was 41 minutes, so it didn't actually go up that much.
Right, and we've had episodes where they were 2-part contained series or show.
Certainly, yeah.
And so that's all I'm saying here is if you make it the same length as what was a 2-part episode, then it's really not that different.
I agree with you that. So I would say, well, I agree with I think everything you guys were saying. I would go so far as to say The Mandalorian might be better without Baby Yoda, which I know in today's day and age of merchandising and memes and all that, that's sacrilegious to say. But like, I honestly think the best episode of The Mandalorian might have been the first episode. And Grogu is not even introduced until the end of the second episode. First episode, this show opens with him walking into the bar out of the snow and basically grabbing the guy who he has a bounty on. And like, man, I remember that like it was yesterday. That whole sequence, I was hooked right away. The episodic nature of it, as you said, Techtic, I think was a huge part of its success in the first season in particular. Season 2, I mean, what I'll say about season 2 is, and this is a spoiler now, I mean, season 2's been out for forever. So if you haven't seen season 2, this is on you. The Luke Skywalker payoff was pretty good. Like, I thought that was a cool sequence. I agree with you, Nerdbomber, that all the Jedi stuff and Skywalker stuff absolutely did not need to happen. I think the show would have been better off without that. But I will begrudgingly admit that climactic payoff was like pretty solid. But then again, after that, we got into territory where I believe when I watched season 3, the first episode, I had not been forced to watch Book of Boba Fett yet. And therefore, I didn't understand when I started watching it and, oh, they're back together again. And there was no indication or, little previously on Mandalorian thing about like how that had happened. It just was. I think that was a huge moment that soured me to the entire experience. I'm inclined to agree with you, Techtic, that it's still possible for this to be good if it is a, basically 2-episode arc that is self-contained within one movie. But why would I have any reason to believe that that's actually going to be what it is?
Oh yeah, you're right. Like, it's going to have the Disney treatment where it's there's this massive world and everything's intertwined and I would
bet you any amount of money Ahsoka's going to be in this. Even just as a cameo, there's basically a 100% chance that Ahsoka will be in this.
I liked what you said where the payoff was good, but was it worth it? And the answer is
no.
Winning the lottery only to blow it on hookers and blow. Like, it's a great payout, but you blow up everything else.
Well, here's the other thing about it, too. I think there's a world in which they absolutely could have achieved the same payoff or the same caliber of payoff without having any sort of Jedi characters involved in the show otherwise. Let's say the Mandalorian is going around doing bounty hunter stuff, and then in the last episode of season 2, he's doing bounty hunter stuff, and Luke Skywalker shows up. Does all the cool Jedi stuff that he did, just without the whole, like, I'm taking Baby Yoda. Like, he could have literally any other reason written into the story for why he would show up.
I think the will they, won't they thing, it doesn't make any sense because from, like, episode 1 when they meet, like, they're going to stay together. That this is the thing that's going to break the Mandalorian's, hard exterior, heart of steel. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a question. It's a really bad will they, won't they?
I think they also, like, and now we're really just, like, putting out our laundry list of like issues that we have with the show. But like, speaking to the Book of Boba Fett experience that I had, the whole like Grogu going with Luke and then deciding to go back to the Mandalorian probably could have been handled. If they knew they were going to do that, it could have been handled and written in probably about 6 billion different and better ways than it was. It was basically just like a 5-minute sequence of like, okay, your training's going well, but I can tell you don't want to be here. Do you want to be here? And Baby Yoda's like, no. And that's like, okay. Like, there just wasn't any build up to it. There wasn't really anything to it. It was just like, it was almost like they're like, whoops, we screwed up. We got to put him back with Mandalorian stat. And then they did that. I don't really know, like, again, I think ideally what this would be is a standalone adventure. It won't be a standalone adventure. So like, I guess what I want to talk about now is like, what is their ultimate plan for the Mandalorian and Grogu from a character arc perspective? I assume they have a plan because, again, Techtic, I think you used the term Disney treatment. They've Disney treatmented this. They know where this is going to go, or at least they know where they want it to go.
In my mind, there's only one plan, and it's for Baby Yoda to embrace what is the Mandalorian, right? It's the same treatment that Mando had, by it and molded by it. That's what needs to happen. That's the right treatment. That'll give us a basically, and I hate to call him Yoda, right? Because he's not Yoda, but that'll basically give us an alternate version of Yoda, sort of the yin to the yang of what we've seen of that species.
I think the main thing I'm concerned with, I think you're probably right that that's the only way they can really go. The main thing I'm concerned with, even within that narrative framework, is, okay, they introduced Baby Yoda. Obviously, the main thing with Baby Yoda is that he is cute, he can use the Force, and he is a massive merchandising opportunity for Disney. Okay, the cuteness, I don't want to say the cuteness has run out, but it probably got old by the end of season 1, and there's no depth to the character. How do you bring depth to a character that is clearly the nucleus of what they want to do when the character can't
starts to speak? That's a
baby,
huge,
etc.
As soon as he opens his mouth and has a voice, I'm sorry, it's not going to be what anybody wants. You can't have him speak.
You don't think he'll speak like Yoda?
No, he's a baby.
Disagree. I want him to open his mouth for the first time and for like Morgan Freeman's voice to come out. That if that happens, I'm back on board. I don't really, but yeah, that's my point. Is like, and yeah, I guess Nerdbomber, if you feel that strongly, probably a bunch of other people feel that strongly, and at that case, at that point, they back themselves into a corner.
Yes, literally, just make him a sidekick, voiceless sidekick. The show should just be about the Mandalorian. And throughout the first season, one of the things that worked is he was like, literally just there for cuteness. He really was. And all of the action and all of the story and everything was about the Mandalorian. The fact that it now has pivoted to being primarily about Grogu is bad. Make it pivot around the Mandalorian. And Grogu is just there for cutes and giggles.
Cutes and giggles.
If I was in a Back to the Future situation where I could go back and I would go back and be like, don't do this.
I think you're underestimating the amount of
Baby
money
Yoda
that they made with Baby Grogu, though.
You have a good thing.
I'm sorry, Mando merch was
Pedro
not selling
Pascal
until
and,
Baby Yoda was a thing.
I'm not sure that Mando merch existed until Baby Yoda was a thing. I mean, Baby Yoda was episode 2, so like, and I remember even like, obviously Baby Yoda was a phenomenon. There were good things. I don't want to say there were good things about Baby Yoda in season 1. People love Baby Yoda. I get it. I know the first time Baby Yoda used the Force, the first time Baby Yoda used the Force, I remember being so deflated instantly because I was like, this is not what I wanted. And like, again, to compare to other Disney Star Wars shows, what's the one that is widely considered to be the best one? It's Andor. And that's because there's no Jedi. Like, that is not a coincidence to me. There's no Jedi in Andor. Everyone thinks it's the best one. It's grounded. It's real. It's better.
What they should have done with this entire show, they should have made it like God of War. They should have made Mando as Kratos and Baby Yoda as Atreus, and that is your storyline. There you go.
Are you trying to live transition?
No, I was just
to our next topic.
We've been talking about God of War a lot lately, and I think that would have been the better way to go about it.
Do it live.
And then he could have even had Jedi powers, but you just never tie it back into the Jedi. And he's like, yo, spam some arrows, buddy. And he does.
Okay. That's another element of this. And we will kind of start moving in the direction of God of War. Like, thinking about God of War, which I'm playing right now, and thinking about Last of Us, which was a phenomenon on HBO, like, I would say the quote-unquote parent-child relationship has maybe never been more in the media spotlight as an effective narrative tool than it is now. And there's, I'm sure, other examples that I'm not even thinking of in the past few years. It's turning into a trope. The Mandalorian does it the worst. That's a statement. If you disagree with me on that, hit me up on Twitter. @OW_Illeagle86. Our main show account is @OnlineWarriors1. We have @OW Nerdbomber, @OW Techtic. I just like, I don't know, this movie might be good. Disney's track record with Star Wars right now is bad. They've maybe never been in a worse spot. So most of what I saw when this news broke was like jokes about how it's not going to be good. So like, I don't think we're alone in our opinions on it. It's a sensible thing for them to do, but I can't be all that excited about it right now. And like, I know that makes me a wet blanket, but
your blanket's pretty moist. But my blanket's moist too. I'm skeptical
I stand
with
by
the
that.
Disney treatment.
So yeah, just again, we mentioned the Twitter handles. Just let us know what you think, what you think this could be, what you want it to be, what you don't want it to be. Also, should Baby Yoda have ever been a thing? Probably you'll say yes, but I'm interested in the listeners' opinions regardless. But let's talk about God of War, because I think the outlook there is considerably rosier. So news here. It's actually not that big of a piece of news. Honestly, I think it's just an excuse for us to talk about God of War, which I fully accept. At CES 2024, which I think is either ongoing or just ended, there was a panel held by Sony at which representatives confirmed that writing is underway for the live-action adaptation of God of War. Now, the live-action adaptation, I don't think the news here is that we're getting one. I think we knew that already. I would say the news here is that it's becoming at least marginally more imminent. Obviously Sony is in a position with, again, what's happened with The Last of Us. And in particular, too, let's also mention Gran Turismo, which I think has done pretty well for them. They're in a spot with God of War and Horizon Zero Dawn coming down the pipe where they want to be trumpeting these things as being this is the next big thing that's going to be as good as those. Nerdbomber, I want to kind of defer to your wisdom here as the resident God of War expert. I guess my first question, what do you want from this? Do you want this to be this is going to sound derogatory, but it's not, rote, what the game does, just do that in the television adaptation, much like The Last of Us did, or do you want something different?
I think that this should follow the adaptation formula that The Last of Us followed, where it is pretty one for one in terms of, how they follow the game. I do think that one of the biggest things is, exposure to the background, though, because if they're basing this entire show off the 2018 version of the game, which I hope they do, because I feel like in terms of story, that's where you have the most emotional, material to kind of base your TV show on. They still need to do a good job of kind of doing flashbacks or something to the original games back in the PlayStation 2 era, because I think you and I both experienced this. There is definitely a little bit lost when you don't know the backstory of Kratos, when you don't know where he came from, and you kind of start to figure out those details throughout the game as you play. But I think because of the condensed timeline that a TV show is given versus a video game, I think that they need to do I don't want to have a recap, but have maybe Kratos having flashbacks to how he became, the God of War.
At the very least, they need to do the Ash scene where his loved ones become his skin color, basically, from their ashes. That at the very least, because that's in game trailers and cutscenes, that's all over the place. That is a bare minimum, in my opinion.
And I do think they need to break the games up similarly to what they did with The Last of Us, where, you're not trying to jam both games into one season. And I don't think they would do that anyway. But I think you have to be very careful about the pacing of the show, because I think in the game, it is a very linear experience, and I think the pacing in the game works very well. But if you try to cram too much information in, I don't know if it's going to be 6 episodes, 8 episodes, 10 episodes, but they have to be very careful with the pacing here.
Well, what I'm going to say, and I'm full disclosure, I am not done with the first game yet. I think I'm right on the doorstep of being done with it, but I have enough sense of the length and the scope of the 2018 game that I'm going to say that the first game is probably 2 seasons. I think, and I agree completely with what you said, especially because my perspective is I think the same as yours was, where when you're playing through the 2018 game, you're getting snippets of who Kratos was and why he is the way that he is. And what you mentioned is that, in a compressed television timeline, you have limited time to flash back and really see much of that. I would say in the game, it's even more so, because the game has the responsibility of showing you those things, but assuming that you played the last one. I think they have much more of an assumption of that than the TV show would have. The TV show is going to assume and should assume that when a viewer comes in, they know nothing about Kratos. I do think that the 2018 game still provides a reasonable starting point for the character to be introduced, but when they do those flashbacks to, his past life before the Scandinavian setting of the 2018 game, I think they have a much higher responsibility to lay out that flashback content better, because even seeing it in the game, I know a decent amount of what his deal is, but I want to know more. That, I think that's an opportunity for Sony to provide fan service in the sense of a 1-to-1 adaptation, but also really compounding on that by saying, hey, you played this part in the game and you didn't know what was going on. We're going to show you and, better express what's going on with this guy. So I think 2 seasons for the first game is reasonable, even at a 10 episode count for both seasons. I agree. I think pacing issues are the thing you need to watch out for. I think the main story of the 2018 game provides a lot of signposts for episode splits, and working the flashback content into that, I think provides you with 20 episodes. And I do think that's probably what I want. Again, I'll defer to you as the expert, but I would think if Sony has their head on straight, they're looking at The Last of Us and saying, what did we do right and what did we do wrong? And what they did right was the 1-to-1.
I mean, that would make sense because it also came out later. And again, not saying I know there's behemoths like Skyrim, Mass Effect, and stuff like that from older generations, but I think that games now currently tend to run a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Like there's just scope creep in games, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think games just tend to be a little bit longer these days.
Right. Yeah. So I think, frankly, I think if I sat down and tried to figure out where the 10 episode breaks would be, I could probably do that and like maybe be a little bit more than halfway through the first game. It's obviously a matter of how they represent a lot of stuff, how much actual fighting they depict, because obviously the game is taking me many, many hours, but it's because I'm spending a lot of time just like kind of, generically fighting Draugrs, which you can probably only show in an interesting way so many times.
I think that's going to be the other interesting aspect of it, because I know like the Last of Us TV show, I think one of the only criticisms, I mean, there's always criticisms of shows, but I think one of the biggest criticisms of The Last of Us that I saw online in terms of like internet discourse was how little we saw of the clickers. Fighting clickers was not a huge part of the show, and it focused more on the characters and their interactions, and there weren't these big battle scenes. And for some people that was a problem, but I think that in TV, like you really can't have these epic battle scenes all the time. And that's another thing that I'm wondering how they're going to handle, because like in The Last of Us, like I don't want to say you see one clicker fight, you've seen them all, but kind of like there's different levels of clickers, and I think they addressed that in the TV show, but like we didn't need to see it every time they walk into a building. They got to take down like 10 clickers. We didn't need to see that. Whereas in God of War, it's a little bit different because you do have like, obviously there are recurring enemy types, but in terms of like, there's some like big battles. You've got Valkyries, you've got, I mean, all of the different Draugrs and stuff like that. I don't know like which ones you deem important to include in the show without it becoming like overly gluttonous in terms of just like action battle scenes, because I don't think that holds a lot of people's attentions for too long, especially if it's like a 10 episode run. I don't know how many battles you can have. So like them deciding to what's important to show and what's not is going to be really interesting, and I feel like very critical because it's a very fine line. Like you could really tricky for them.
The other thing I'm wondering about, I don't even know if I fall one way or the other in terms of how they should do it. The Last of Us, the other thing that to its credit made it a much more confined and really one-to-one season of a television show is it's very linear. There's very limited side questing you can do in The Last of Us. God of War, not as much. I mean, God of War, there are entire realms that you don't need to go to complete the main story as far as I know. I mean, I'm trying to like basically 100% this thing, so I'm doing every single thing that I can do. But like, Niflheim and Muspelheim, they're going to be in there, I would think. In particular, I imagine Niflheim will be. But like, I guess how do they weave that into the main story is a question that I have. Because in the game, they're basically just like, oh, if you go here, you can get better gear. I don't know that that's a strong enough justification for weaving it into the main story unless there's a specific thing they need to go and get, which they could probably easily make something up.
That's another concern too. So like the other part of this news story was it's God of War and Horizon that are, finally in writing and on its way further into production. And Horizon, I think I'm the only one here who's played it, but Horizon Zero Dawn is a very open world game. Like, yes, there is a linear main story, but there's a lot of things and side quests and side characters that for me became very critical to the game because I spent like 80 hours playing that game. But I don't know how well that translates to TV. And I get they can just follow that main story, and the main story is very, very good, but there's a lot of stuff that won't translate well, and I'm just very curious to see how they're going to handle that too, because I think it's a lot easier to adapt a more linear story obviously than an open world game, and finding balance of building the world out, because a lot of the world building in Horizon Zero Dawn comes from interactions that you have in these side missions that you may never even encounter if you just mainline sprint through the main story. And I feel like it'll be more ripe for people complaining because there will be entire side characters that will never show up in the show if they don't delve into some of the side quests.
Right. Now, in full disclosure, you said you're the only one. I tried Zero Dawn. I didn't get very far. I think because I was daunted by the open world. It's significantly more open world than God of War, and certainly way more open world than Last of Us, if only because Last of Us isn't really open world at all. So I agree that's a valid concern to have. Now, Techtic, you've been relatively quiet. I want to get your perspective on this as I think just fully non-God of War player. As an outsider looking in, what do you want this show to provide? And I'll also ask you first, what do you think when you look at Kratos, who are you casting?
With respect to Kratos, I don't want to have any preconceived notions of any other actors. I'd rather they took the time to find someone that really fits the image than picking some hot actor. That's my first gut feel of what needs to be done. The second thing is, as far as what I want to see and what I expect, this needs to be like, I don't want to say like Sparta. I don't want to say the 300 or anything like that. But this needs to be something where it feels like I could be watching almost a historical documentary, just with loaded with like gore and like action. And it has to toe that line between the both. And I know I'm kind of just saying nothing while saying a lot of things, but
well, the war is a huge component of it.
Exactly.
I think I know exactly what you're trying to say.
And you don't want to dive too heavy into the lore and take away from like the incredible fight scenes that we know that God of War has.
See, but that also just makes me want you to play the 2018 version of the game, because I think that opinion is very much steeped in the original God of War games. And I don't want to say that there's not blood and gore and violence in God of War 2018, but
he walks around with a head on his hip.
But it's secondary. I know exactly what Nerdbomber is saying. Like I would say, and I know you'll agree, Nerdbomber, like if there's one thing that the 2018 game takes very, very seriously, and to its credit, takes very seriously, is how they handle the lore. And if anything, it seems like their chief focus a lot of the time. And I would say the show and the showrunners, people that are writing this, they have a similar responsibility. I think they need to take that part very seriously and in some way treat themselves as educators on Norse mythology. I think it's an opportunity for sure.
Well, I mean, the Norse mythology and the game itself is very good and the storytelling is great, but especially when I played this game, the Norse mythology was one of the main reasons that I picked it up to begin with, because I think on the old episodes of the podcast, when I first started playing this, I think it was like 2-3 years ago, I picked it up because I had been reading a lot of like mythological retelling novels. I had played Hades, which is obviously very steeped in, mythology, and I was like wanted to keep that train going, and they did a really, really good job of, delving into mythological lore and explaining it and tying all of these characters together and building this vast world. I think what kicked it off for me? Now I do know. I played Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and then it just kind of like snowballed from there. There's something about mythological lore that will always kind of trump the gore aspect in terms of, these games and books. They're inherently tied, because when you think of gods, you always think, especially like the ancient gods and stuff, it's always paired with violence and humans getting sacrificed and gods are ruthless. So I think they kind of go hand in hand, but I think the handling and the humanitization of these mythological characters is also very critical to the series and the game.
It's a very good word. It ties directly into the theme of the game, the 2018 game, at least as I understand it, how all this lore is handled. So yeah, I think we're all generally excited for this. As a final casting note, I would toss Dave Bautista out there.
Immediately no.
I think there's a world in which he could do it. Okay. Do you care to say why?
He's too lighthearted and funny, and it would make Kratos too much of a jokey character.
Yeah, I disagree. Have you ever seen Spectre?
No.
Not that it's a great movie, but he is not at all funny in that movie, nor is he trying to be. Like, yeah, I think because of what James Gunn and Guardians of the Galaxy and also what Rian Johnson and Glass Onion did to him, they turned him into that. I don't know that he necessarily needs to be a typecast for that for the rest of his career. I think he is capable of gravitas. I would also go so far as to say he's capable of it more so than Dwayne Johnson.
I wouldn't suggest him either.
Okay, hear me out. Jason Statham.
He's not big
He'd
enough.
have to get bigger, for sure. But
yeah, this guy needs to be a freaking mountain of a man. And like, I do like Jason Statham, and he is a very serious dude. His body of work is too large. Because that's the other thing about Dave Bautista, is that he hasn't been on the scene for all that long. Jason Statham's been around since like I was in like high school, and he's been doing one-off action movies for forever. I'm not saying that should disqualify him, but I just think there's a lot more I have to work around mentally with him than I would with Dave Bautista.
Well, isn't he busy keeping bees right now?
He is keeping bees right now. Yeah, I've actually heard that movie's pretty good, which just baffles me based on what I know of it. But
I also, with Atreus, I kind of want, I'm going to butcher your last name. Sorry for listening. Sonny Soljic to play himself. And I know he's getting kind of old now, so it wouldn't work.
He's too old.
But like,
yeah.
It's going to be weird to see a different face. Like, this is going to sound terrible, but Kratos kind of looks generic enough where any person who's buff with a beard and bald can probably play him. But there's something very specific about Atreus' character design. I mean, they obviously mimicked, the mocap voice actor's face to a T, and it's going to be very different for me. And I guess it was the same with The Last of Us,
I'm on board
too.
with that casting. honestly.
He's
18, too old now,
so,
but
I think they could do it. I guess it depends on the production schedule, because I was going to fall back on my constant child actor suggestion for casting Jacob Tremblay, who is only a year older, 17. Or sorry, a year younger. I think he would also be good. I don't have any other suggestions outside of those two, if only because I don't really know many child actors. But again, let us know. Hit us up on the old tweeter, who you want to be in this show and what you want from this show besides the things that we've mentioned, or where do you think we went wrong. We'll take a short break now before we come back to talk through science. But before we do that, it's that time again in the episode. I would be remiss if I did not shout out our fantastic Patreon producer, Mr. Stephen Keller. Stephen's been supporting us for quite a while now on the show. He's had multiple guest spots. That's part of his set of perks as our Patreon producer. He's a night level subscriber on our Patreon. He gets this weekly shout out in every episode. He gets input into the weekly game segment. He, of course, gets access to the monthly secret segment and vlog, and as I mentioned, the occasional guest spot on the show. There is also a Squire level of support, which gets you access to the monthly secret segment, and a page level, which gets you access to the monthly secret segment. For the details on any and all of those levels of support, you can head over to patreon.com/onlinewarriorspodcast. Say hi to us. Say hi to Steven. Consider giving back to the show that you've been listening to for hopefully a while now. So again, we'll take a short break now, shout out another podcast, and come back to talk about science and the universe. That's a plug if ever there was one. So we'll see you in a few minutes.
Welcome aboard Too Vague Airlines. We're cruising here at 40,000 feet. That might be too many feet, but what do I know? I'm not really an airplane. I'm a podcaster. Actually, I'm a co-podcaster. I'm the co-host of several episodes of the Too Vague podcast. If you haven't heard it, you're missing out. Check out the Too Vague podcast. Any place podcasts do whatever they do.
Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned off the fasten seatbelt sign. For your continued safety, Too Vague Airlines requires that you keep your seatbelt fastened at all times while seated. But while you're seated, you can tune into the Too Vague podcast, TWOVAGUE, on your favorite podcast services and enjoy the flight.
Okay, welcome back. We're here to talk through science and universes. I'm just going to read some stuff here, and we're going to talk about it. That's what tends to happen on this show, but I felt like saying that. An astronomer at the University of Central Lancashire, which I assume is in the United Kingdom or Scotland or something like that, has just discovered, and I love this phrasing, an ancient, problematic ring-like structure of their very own, hanging in deep space, imaginatively named the Big Ring. Thankfully, it's no super weapon or portal from some far-flung region of space, which, honestly, in my opinion, bummer. Instead, it appears to be an enormous collection of galaxies that have inexplicably coalesced to form a vast circle when viewed from the perspective of Earth. We're seeing the Big Ring, of course, as it was when the light left the galaxies. The ancient structure boasts a circumference of around 4 billion light years, and as a point of context, the Andromeda Galaxy, the distance between the Milky Way and its closest neighbor, the Andromeda Galaxy, is a mere 2.5 million light years away. So one thing I like to think about in the context of this sort of stuff is that the note of like, we're seeing the Big Ring as it was when the light left its galaxies. Because light takes so long to travel, even though light is super fast, obviously, because of the vast distances involved in like deep space, the Big Ring might not be a ring anymore as we're currently talking about it, but the light has arrived to us. Techtic, you're a science man. What's your take on the Big Ring?
So the reason why I wanted to talk about this, one, is because there's not a lot of instances where, you know, science fiction and in video games can relate to some, and this is really like very loosely related, but like I thought this was fun because you always think about the Halo ring when you talk about rings in space. And we've already covered that this isn't the Halo ring, it's not a weapon, nothing like that. But I thought it was cool to talk about in this show because of that. As far as like my take on this and what I find interesting about it is I want every single one of you to look as far forward back that you are on a ball. You're not on a flat plane, you're on a ball. And so we are looking at these galaxies in a ring, and we're saying to ourselves, well, this is a statistical improbability because no structures beyond a certain size should ever form a ring or a shape that we can discern. It should just be complete randomness out there in the galaxy. Well, I want to pose a follow-on question and say, well, how do you know we're not in a ring and we're just not observing it from our own perspectives and all galaxies ring together like this? And so what this does is it turns everything what we kind of understand on how these galaxies align and form and hang out in the universe on its head. And that's very exciting to me.
So let me, in a sense, counter-argue that and say that, okay, so we see this big ring. It's out there. What can we take away from seeing it? What benefit does it get us to seeing it?
Well, let me ask you a question. If you see a bunch of galaxies in a line, okay, around you, right? They look like they're just kind of in a line, in a loose line, but really you're part of the ring. That's my takeaway. That's what I'm saying.
Let me put it more philosophically. A, I'm fine with not knowing that. B, I get that there are astrological bodies we can look at and learn things, but things like the big ring, which are so far away, and we just see it's a circle, and we want to derive meaning from that, why can't we just look at it and see it for what it is? And just be like, wow, it's a big circle.
Well, it might suggest that there's other forces out there that we just don't yet understand that are maintaining the ring-like structure of these galaxies. There was some talk of harmonics from the Big Bang that would cause them to ring in this pattern that we're seeing, billions of light years, quote unquote, in the past. And there might be more understanding of how that Big Bang affected the formation. There might be, again, this unknown force that's holding these together. There's so much that we don't know. And we've talked about this even within our own ocean. We are merely in our infancy on what we understand about our own planet, let alone the whole galaxy.
Yeah, I mean, the other question I have, I have a few, but like one of the other questions I have is, it's referred to as a ring-like structure. Let's say it's not a perfect circle. Because looking at it, there's a picture here too. Looking at it, it doesn't appear to be a perfect circle. What if it's just a coincidence? Or like, what if we're seeing a circle and it's not actually a circle? You know what I mean? What if these things are moving independently? They are happening to make a circle in a snapshot of time that, again, was many, many millions of years ago, based on how long the light took to come here.
Ooh. And like, what about like size and depth perception?
Yeah, it could be an oval, but it's like an optical.
Well, no, but maybe it's not even a circle. Maybe you just got some big bad boys super far away and some small boys super up close, and then when you superimpose them on, like, you're just looking out into the world. And
the article touched on this. That's where there could be spiraling as well, right? So a spiral in the 2D plane looks like a circle.
Sure.
Right?
Yes. But my point is, unless there are greater forces at play here that we can somehow harness to our benefit or use to predict certain things, let me just again ask existentially, seeing this, why do we care? Or why should I care? I guess is more of the question that I'm asking. It's. I guess it's interesting, but given the fact that we don't even know if it's a circle or a spiral or a random smattering that happens to look like one of those things.
Well, even if it's a spiral, that still turns on its head that we have these megastructures that seemingly should not be a megastructure. And I know the counter-argument could be, well, you can call anything a megastructure, right? As depending on how you define what a structure is.
Yeah. I guess I'm just thinking about Monday morning when I'm in the shower before going to work, thinking about how insignificant I am in the universe. And I'm reacting negatively to this news because this news doesn't help me feel less that way.
This is more like you're asking the question, why do we care about history, basically?
No, right? I don't think I'm asking that.
Like, that happened in the past.
At all. I think I'm just asking if this is a snapshot in time and we can't do anything to change it and it won't. Like, I guess I don't know what benefit it brings us seeing this and acknowledging it. And I don't want us to take...
Because it gives us insight to the formation and travel of our own galaxy.
Does it? Right? Or are we mistakenly taking greater meaning from it than should be taken? It's too far away. We just don't... I don't think we can rely on any conclusions that are drawn.
I think it's a mass relay, and we should be looking for Commander Shepard.
I'm trying to make sense of this in terms of what it could mean, and there's just not enough information or concrete evidence for me to derive any sort of meaning from it.
So you're the guy that these two rocks, you're out in nature, and these two rocks, they stick to each other. And someone goes, wow, look at it, these two rocks are sticking to each other. And then you go, well, why do we care?
That is a completely different example.
Went on to create things like motors and solenoids and all these other cool magnetic things. And you were the guy going, why do we care about rocks? What do rocks
I disagree with that comparison entirely. It's a completely different and unrelated example to this. Because you can see the rocks sticking together and they're irrefutably sticking together. There's a bunch of stars and or galaxies that happen to, at this moment in time, look kind of like a circle. I'm not as willing to take meaning from that as two rocks sticking together. Two rocks sticking together, of course, there's forces of attraction.
All right, so then let me ask you another question. You look at the grandeur of space, and these are mapped and spread about. And then you look at the brain, and you look at the way that neurons are mapped and spread about, and they look eerily similar. Are you not going to say that there's some there's this natural force and order of things? Or are you going to say, it's a coincidence, who cares? Galaxies' brain synapses look the same, who cares? No, the reason why we as a species have continued to progress and advance is because we're intrigued by patterns, and we recognize that, hey, this is interesting, we should explore this more. Be inquisitive.
I'm not saying it shouldn't be explored more. I'm saying that right now I'm not willing to put much stock in it.
Yeah, people like you are.
But yeah, go ahead.
Anti-advanced.
That's what science is for.
I don't care. Move on with your life.
No. That's the opposite of what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I'm approaching this from a perspective of skepticism. Not from the perspective of, this is going to answer so many questions for us about so many things. I'm more so saying, all right, that we see this thing, let's maybe try to better understand what it is, and if it is anything. I would like for it to be something. I think that would be interesting. I'm interested in space. There's a lot we still don't know. But I guess I'm just looking at this picture, it's like barely a ring. That's the thing that's why I brought that up. It's like,
basically what I hear is, I could draw a better
ring.
Circle.
I think I could draw a better
Get my
circle.
compass out. I feel like I've just contributed minor quips because really, I feel like I am not educated enough to know what the implication of this should be. And I feel like I'd say something dumb.
Well, yeah, I'm certainly not either, which is another part of why I'm basically saying, why should I? I need someone to explain it to me like I'm 5. I think that's what I'm really getting at here. And someone probably can. And Techtic, you've done an admirable job of trying to do so. But
you should email this person and tell them you can draw a better circle and that they should be ashamed.
I don't think I'm feeling that combative, but I appreciate what you're trying to say, which is that I should go easier on the people that are making these discoveries, which is, I'll take that feedback and internalize it. I don't know. I guess we'll see. Maybe 2 weeks from now, they'll be like, well, the ring is definitely a ring, and here's why. And I just think that then,
show me the money.
I'm going to care a lot. Show me the proof, I think is what I'm saying. Show me numbers, Yeah, there's another one-liner. You're right. That's really what's happening for you in this segment. Well, we'll save Nerdbomber from the person that she's in, and we'll move on. But yeah, let us know what you think the big ring means, and also if I suck. You're probably gonna say yes, but I don't know. Tell me why. Let's move to what are you up to Wednesday. Techtic, since I was so hard on you there, I'm gonna let you go first and tell us what you've spent the last week getting up to.
So we have been kind of having an itch on co-op games, and so we cracked open Sonic Superstars. Now, if you don't know what Sonic Superstars is, but you have been around to see Sonic over the years, Sonic Superstars is the co-op Sonic game that kind of takes a lot of inspiration and gameplay from Sonic 2 way back on the Sega. And what Sonic 2's co-op was you played as Sonic, and the player 2, which would always definitely be like your younger sibling who didn't know what they were doing, would be Tails, and you would just leave them in the dust, and that's it. It wasn't truly co-op. This is truly co-op, and the kind of the weird part about it, which I don't know if is good or bad, is the camera doesn't. I thought from the trailers and that it splits to 2 split screens, but that was actually just showing that it was bunch of people doing online play. In actual split screen co-op, it splits it up by not splitting it up at all and just has the camera follow who's ever making more forward progress. And so in some instances, if the person is falling off the screen because they messed up and dying, but their forward progress, it'll basically just kill you both. And then in other instances, you'll be fighting that other person who's making forward progress because you can't see where you're going and it won't let you see where you're going. So the gameplay is fun. I think there's camera tracking fixes that should definitely be had, but overall, Nerdbomber and I were having a pretty good time. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about was we started watching the next season of For All Mankind, and I gotta tell you, season 1 was the best. We're just kind of trucking along. It seems like a lot of entitled, whiny people that should just retire or give it up as kind of the season. So yeah, go back to season 1 because it was great, but
However, I will say, I think we felt this way about season 3 too. And like it came out of the gates really slow and then it picked up as it went. So like I'll reserve my judgment, I guess, to see where this goes.
I think the problem was season 1 was so good and then just none of them really compare.
Well, even season 2 was good. I think they moved away, and obviously their whole shtick is time jumps. Like now they're supposed to be, this latest season is like the mid-2000s decade. And so they obviously have to move on from some of the original characters, but I think the characters they chose to focus on as they continued forward, like that wasn't always a good choice. But hey.
So yeah, that's what I've been up to.
All right, so we watched that new Jake Johnson and Anna Kendrick movie as well that just came out on Hulu called Self-Reliance.
Yeah, very interested in hearing about this because we almost watched this, I think it was yesterday, and we decided no. So I want to see if we were right or not.
I guess the way that the trailer almost showed it off was like a rom-com with a quirky twist. And that is really not what the movie ended up being. Like, yes, there were elements of that, but that is not what the movie ended up being. It was more about, you know, Jake Johnson's character's internal strife and, you know, finding himself, I guess, through the process of this crazy game that he ends up playing. And it's just, it wasn't exactly what I expected. That's not to say that it wasn't good. It was very interesting, but there were also times when I'm like, okay, this feels a little over the top and out there for me. I don't know. It was, like I said, I don't want to call it a mid-movie because I think it was more clever than a mid-movie, but even when they tried to like make you think that the movie was something it wasn't, like I think they tried to lead you down a path where you thought maybe things weren't as they appeared. It was very easy to figure out what was happening. Like there was a point in time in the movie where Techtic turned to me and was like, "What do you think about this element?" And I literally
called it on the nose.
I called it on the nose, and we were very early on in the movie, and then it exactly played out the way that I thought it was going to be. So I think they thought they were being a little more clever than they actually. I don't know if I'd ever go back and watch it again, and it's probably something in like a year I'm going to forget completely about, but it was fine.
We watched 2 movies this past weekend, and I'd have to say the other movie we watched was significantly better.
So what I would have wanted this movie to be is more like Palm Springs, which I think you guys watched.
That's what I thought it was going to be like too.
And that was awesome because, and like you said, it would have been more of like a quirky rom-com. And I think that is how this movie was marketed, because watching the trailer, I was like, okay, it's a rom-com with like a little something on it.
It's like Jake Johnson
and
is
I agree
perfect
that probably,
rom-com like look that we were talking about.
Yeah. And I think that's probably what I would have wanted as well. I don't even know what it was exactly about the trailer that my wife and I were like, maybe not. But it sounds like you're like, I mean, I know you said you're glad you watched it, but everything else you're saying is that you
well, it's more so like I did.
I don't really know what to take away from it.
I expected a Palm Springs type movie, and that's not what I got at all. So it's not that I disliked it. It was like, it was a little too out there for my taste at some points, but like it was more, I just felt a little bit misled by the trailer. And so there are points in the movie where I'm like, okay, we're just going on the rom-com that I was told it was going to be. And that was a little sad.
Sorry that happened to you.
But then we made up for it by watching Ghosted, which I thought, you guys know my take on action movies these days, right? Like I'm not like a super big action movie person. Like
Ghosted is the one with a really hot lady, right? Like really hot.
It's got Chris Evans and Anna de Armas, and also who's that guy?
You're correct, by the way. She's my list of celebrity crush.
I don't know. It seemed like she was wearing a wig in this movie throughout the entire thing, and that kind of like I was distracted by that.
De-hotted?
No,
Okay,
I got distracted by the fact that it was like a very obvious wig, and I wasn't sure why they did that when she could have just like naturally just had her regular hair. And I don't know for sure that it was a wig. Maybe her hair was just like very stiff, but there was just something off. But
I heard it wasn't very good. Chris Evans and Anna de Armas, known pairing from Knives Out, so I would have thought that they would work well together. But it sounds like you liked it, so I don't know. Tell me more.
I think it's not something that I don't think I would have gone to the movies to see, but as a streaming original, I thought it upheld its end of the bargain. Essentially, they meet and they kind of have like a one-night stand, and Chris Evans is very clingy, and they have this whole discussion about how she's like a international art dealer. Of course, you know, what every spy says that they are. And he buys it, and like she's never home. She wants something like very low maintenance. So then she disappears off the face of the planet, which is why the movie is called Ghosted. And he like continues to text her like 15 times back to back, and then decides to use a tracker because he had put what is basically an air tag on like his inhaler, and she had held it for him. So he tracks her down to London and then finds out that she's really a spy, and then he gets dragged into like her crazy spy mission.
Which, like, let me tell you, Chris Evans plays a fantastic damsel in distress.
I agree with this.
Yeah.
And I liked the fact, first of all, they had really good banter between the two of them. Like, I thought they had believable chemistry. And the fact that Chris Evans, like the guy in the scenario, was the damsel in distress, I think turned the genre a little bit on its head. The only times when like I kind of groaned inwardly, there were like a few moments, one in particular, and this isn't really a spoiler, but he's like hanging off a piece of metal on a bus and like manages to somehow maneuver himself back into the bus.
Well, she turned the bus to maneuver in.
I
She was the
understand.
action hero.
But like most people in that scenario would probably not be able to cling on to a piece of metal hanging over a cliff. Like you just wouldn't have the strength to do that.
You'd be surprised what your body could do.
But even like some of the, like he was able to take down skilled assassins, and like, so that you're like, okay, dude, you're supposed to be a farmer. Can I buy this? I don't know. But generally speaking, it was entertaining. I think they focused correctly. Like the action wasn't taking itself too seriously. Like inherently in all of the action scenes, like it was very tongue-in-cheek, or at least I thought it felt that way. And that's kind of what I want out of an action movie. So for me, like it did have rom-com elements. It did have some action elements. I didn't have to think too hard. I was entertained, and that's exactly what it advertised to me. And I think after having watched a trailer that was not representative of a movie, watching this trailer and being like, this is exactly what I'm getting, was very refreshing.
Yeah, I'm going to read something for you. Listlessly wafting between action, comedy, and romance without ever solidifying into a satisfying whole, Ghosted earns a chorus of boos. 25% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's
Boo.
interesting that the consensus is basically exactly what you just said, which is that it does all three of those things, and that's fine. So
Yeah.
it's really, it's a matter of what you want. 55% audience score, by the way. So you're
That's exactly, like, I would say this is like a very average movie. So I fall in line with the audience score. This is not going to win any awards. It's not going to be something I remember in a year, but it's exactly what I wanted. It told me exactly what it was, and that's exactly what I wanted and exactly what I got. And you can't necessarily fault a movie for, like, I'm not thinking too hard about this one. It did exactly what it told me it was gonna.
I'm going to push back on one point. I agree that movies like that can be great, but it's less likely if they're 2 hours long. It's looking at the runtime and describing what the movie is, it's too long. I don't know if you felt that way.
Too long. I don't know.
Fair
It
enough.
really didn't feel too long at all because it had enough of like the rom-com setup, and then it almost transitioned into a different movie. So I would think like the pre-setup almost felt like your traditional rom-com and took about like, I don't know, a half hour. And then like your action movie setup was like an hour and a half. And it didn't feel that long. Granted, we did take a break because, you know, the dog had to go out, but like I didn't feel like it overstayed its welcome that much.
My only complaint is there was too much suplexing. They mentioned
was a
one
lot.
time that Chris Evans wrestled in high school, and any
One
chance
time,
he
they
get,
mentioned it like 5 times.
any chance he can get, he'd freaking suplex a bad guy. Like, listen, I wrestled in high school, and I don't go around just suplexing people. Like,
He does
this
that.
isn't a thing.
But you could because you wrestled in high school. Well, does that mean it's my turn?
It is.
I'll keep mine short. I watched Oppenheimer. That's where I'm going here. You want to talk about long movies? I mean, that Oppenheimer is 3 hours long, pretty much on the nose. We were in a situation where we had some bad weather this weekend. Some of our plans got moved around or canceled, so we were kind of sitting at home. And if ever there was an opportunity for us to watch a 3-hour movie, which we usually don't have the time for, it was then. So we popped it on. I have to say, I mean, I kind of, based on reviews I had heard from other people, I know that it got really good reviews generally, and like had a good box office run. Everyone said it was great, and it's winning a bunch of awards right now. I think it won a bunch of Golden Globes. I kind of went in with low expectations because the people who I had talked to firsthand about it said that it was boring, a little disjointed, badly paced. I really liked it. What I will say about it is that you think the story isn't, I don't know, you may think the story isn't interesting. Or interesting enough. I kind of went in thinking like, I know what there is to know about this. And obviously you can see where this is going. I definitely didn't. There's a very interesting, maybe not quite midpoint, but maybe 2 hours in, the movie kind of changes tacks pretty dramatically. So like there's maybe a first 2 hours that you'll like more than the last hour or vice versa. But as an entire piece, I think it worked really well. What I will say is Robert Downey Jr. just won the Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor, and I like Robert Downey Jr. quite a bit, if only because he was a great Iron Man, but he's also been a great Sherlock Holmes and plenty of other things. he was like easily the worst actor in the movie, and it wasn't even close. So I don't really know what the Golden Globes are smoking, or what maybe the Academy will be smoking when he wins that one. He was like easily the worst part. Not even the worst actor, maybe the worst part of the movie. So that part I didn't really understand, but Cillian Murphy was amazing. The soundtrack / score was amazing. The production value was amazing. Direction was very good. It was, in a lot of ways, exactly what I wanted it to be. So if you have 3 hours, I would say this would be a really great movie to watch on a plane. And some people may take that as me slighting the movie. It's really not. It's more so that when you're on a plane, you know you're going to be sitting in one spot for 3 hours if the flight's long enough. So take the opportunity to watch Oppenheimer if you can, I guess is where I'm landing on this. So yeah, did that. Otherwise, kind of just trying to wrap up God of War. Almost there with it. Next week, I may be done with it, depending on how the rest of my week goes. But that's the current description of me and how I'm spending my time. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the Quizmaster today, who I believe is Techtic.
It is.
I will first go over the rankings and the tracking. Currently, I'm 1-0. Techtic is 1-0. Steven 0-0. Nerdbomber 0-2. You got to get off the schneid, as they say. So we'll see if you can do that today. Techtic, without further ado, I'll turn it over to you to lay out the topic and the questions.
Okay, so the topic is Mars rovers, kind of sticking in the space theme today. And we're going to get right into it with the first question. And Illeagle, you're going to go first.
Yeah, rare territory for me, but I accept.
When did the first rover land on Mars? In what year?
Yeah, this would have been... I feel like I have a decent sense of when this actually was. I'm going to say 1996.
I'll use my +1 early, 1997.
It's a smart +1 usage.
It's a very smart +1.
Yeah,
Mars Pathfinder was launched December 4th, 1996, and landed on Mars July 4th, 1997.
Brutal. So I had the launch year right, but the landing year was wrong. Good. Hey, game respect game. That's incredible +1 work, Nerdbomber.
So the Opportunity rover's final message to NASA from Mars was, "My battery is low and it's getting dark." This message then went on to go viral across the internet. When did this viral message get sent?
Wasn't this recently? Wasn't this like 2022? I feel like this is a gotcha question.
Is that your
2022?
guess?
2022.
I think it was before that, but I'm not going to go all the way back to Jesus times. I don't want to use that in my tool belt quite yet. So I'm just going to say 2014, because I think it was sometime between then and the number you said.
On February 13th, 2019, NASA announced that the mission of a robotic rover named Opportunity had come to an end after a dust storm had blocked its solar panels. This rover had spent 15 years exploring the surface of Mars, which, by the way, it was only supposed to be designed for a 90-day mission. So, let's go, Opportunity. Let's go.
But when was the tweet actually sent?
February 13th,
right
2019.
Around okay.
Yeah, that's right. It was then. Okay, I'll take the point.
All right, so we're all tied up.
That's good for the team.
The next question. The Perseverance is the heaviest drone, weighing how much in pounds? And by the way, this is Earth gravity, so no shenanigans to be had.
That's really good clarification. Boy, I mean, drones be heavy, but not that heavy. It's lighter than a car, but how much does a car weigh? I'm going to say 278 pounds.
I'm going to say 400 pounds. It's got to withstand the dust storms.
That is an excellent guess. And she's right. That's what I was going to say. It's got to be able to not move from weather and be pretty sturdy. So the weight of the Perseverance is 2,260 pounds.
Oh, so it wasn't an actual
way off.
guess,
all
but
right.
But the logic,
it was better than mine.
Logic was sound.
You're right.
All right. So Nerdbomber's up by 1, 2 questions left. Still anybody's game. Okay. So it's no surprise that the Opportunity traveled the farthest of all Mars rovers, being it was on there for 15 years. How far in total miles did it travel?
Are you counting the distance from Earth to Mars?
No, just Mars traversing.
I mean, it's got a break for solar charging, right? I'm going to say it did 50,000 miles. Put some wear on those treads. Think about your car.
An insane number. That's like circling the globe 5 times. Boy, I know that the gamesmanship is to use the +1, but I'm just not going to do that. I'm going to say 1.
1 was actually a really, really good guess. So 1, it has to charge the solar panels. 2, they don't want to go too far from base. They're kind of collecting and roaming very specific areas. So actually, after 15 years, it only traveled 28.1 miles.
That's it?
So,
I thought it was
so
scooting.
50,000
I'm like thinking of my poor vehicle, like
Just
when I had it for
scooting.
15 years, had like
we have
100,000.
It's just screaming across.
we have the opportunity.
Like
We've got the Perseverance.
Nothing to
and
hit.
the Nerdbomber's next rover, the scooter, just scooting.
Okay, well it's tied up. All right, I'm really glad I didn't +1 because I know the game wants you to +1 there, but I avoided that pratfall, so to speak.
How much in total is the Perseverance project projected to cost for the entire mission? This includes development, launch, operations, analysis, etc.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking billies for sure, and we're talking high billies. Well, are we talking high billies? I'm going to say $6.2 billion, to be clear. $6.2 billion.
200 million. And I know that's low, but that's my answer.
200 million is an excellent guess. So
Shut
Nerdbomber actually takes this one home. You're going to be sad because Illeagle, you're actually closer. The Perseverance rover is projected to cost $2.7 billion, of which $2.2 billion was for spacecraft development, $243 million for launch services, and approximately $300 million for operations and scientific analysis for its 2-year primary mission.
So I'm not closer. Like, I'm not closer at all.
Yeah, math is hard.
Nerdbomber was closer. Yeah. Okay. Well, fair enough. I overdid it. You know, sometimes you just lose. So I moved to 1-1. Nerdbomber to 1-2. So still in last place, Nerdbomber. Just a heads up to you that you're still in last place. But you will host next week's quiz, in which Techtic and I will return to our face-to-face series for 2024.
How's Hawkeye going, by the way?
I just haven't started yet, so it's going great. Look, I have a whole year to do it. That's the way I see it. So I'll get to it. Get off my back about it, etc. We hope you all have a great week. We'll see you next week to do another quiz, more topics. In the meantime, stay safe. Keep on podcasting.